What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you the top Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. In today's recap, we'll be going over the good, the bad, and the ugly that occurred this week. We have auctions here from almost every generation of the Pokemon TCG. I am so glad you joined me today. Stay tuned to the very end. You're not going to want to miss today's recap. Today's auction recap is brought to you by lowpopping.com, your source for investment-worthy Pokemon cards. If you are looking for a reliable and trustworthy seller in this hobby and are looking for authentic Pokemon card grails to purchase, you need to go over to lowpopping.com, where they cater to investors of high-end Pokemon cards. They have numerous cards graded by PSA, CGC, and BGS, as well as numerous autographed cards and graded booster packs. And a lot of these pieces you see here, folks, you won't find anywhere else. And I just can't emphasize this enough. If you see something that you must have, but you don't have the cash on hand, you can easily trade for or make offers on most things you see. And don't forget to take advantage of their buy now, pay later options as well. A link to the Low Popping website will be in the description of this video. A big thank you to those of you who have reached out to me on Instagram, which has been a surprising amount of people, telling me what they recently bought from lowpopping.com. It's been very encouraging, and I really appreciate it, and I pray that you continue to do so. Alright folks, let's jump into this recap, starting off with this Charmander promo from the Obsidian Flames Elite Trainer box. Continues to do very well. Here is the regular promo from the regular Elite Trainer box. Is selling as a PSA 10 this week for about $157, which is up about $30 from what it's been selling the past couple of weeks, but that pales in comparison to the Pokemon Center promo of this card, which has sold twice this week as a PSA 10, once for $870, another time for $950. So this card is very close to being worth $1,000. Up next, we have this illustration rare Magikarp, which has been one of the most expensive illustration or special illustration rares of the year. Here's a PSA 10 that sold for $1,075. Another copy sold for $1,100, and then we saw one sell for $1,115. Speaking of illustration rares, here we have the Groudon from Paradox Rift that sold as a PSA 10 for $255, which is not too shabby. This card has been climbing in value slowly but surely. On to a couple of incredible alt art sales. Here's a Giratina V from Lost Origin, sold this week for $1,375. Here's the Latios EX SIR from Surging Sparks that sold for $790. And then we stumble across this guy, and he's seen better days. It's the Pikachu EX Special Illustration Rare that sold this week for $1,135, and then again for about $910 for a PSA 10. And let me remind you that a month or so ago, this card was selling for about, well, over 3 times as much. It used to sell for close to $3,000. And the same goes for the regular Pikachu EX from this set, which has sold this week for $130, when about a month ago it was selling for over 3 times that at $414. So these two Pikachu cards right here are about 1/3 the value they were before, but that's not to say they can't come up, right? In this hobby, you never know what's going to spike back up, so stay tuned. However, the sealed cases of Surging Sparks continue to do very well. Here is a case of 6 booster boxes that sold this week for $1,275. Now on to a Pikachu card that continues to do exceptionally well. The Pikachu Van Gogh promo card sold this week as a PSA 10 for $470, and then $510 in auction. And then on to the S tier alt art cards. We have the Rayquaza VMAX from Evolving Skies, sold this week for $925, and this card is also very close to being worth $1,000 as a PSA 10. And then here we have the Moonbryon VMAX as a PSA 10 that sold for $2,025, and this is officially, as of right now, an $2,000+ card. And then on to the Latios GX from Team Up. This is the numero uno alt art that sold this week as a PSA 10 for $3,500, and then again for $3,950. A $4,000 alt art as a PSA 10, folks. And if that doesn't make sense to you, let's look at it this way. The Moonbryon VMAX as a PSA 10, as of right now, has 14,233 copies. So that's quite a bit, almost 15,000 PSA 10s for that card, and it sells for about $2,000, whereas the Latios GX has about a tenth as much. Has about 10% as many PSA 10s, only having 1,583 copies. So seeing as how the alt arts and the special illustration rares seem to have so many PSA 10 copies, this Latios GX does not have nearly as much as the other alt arts, which is what's driving this $4,000 price tag of this card. On to the metal cards from the Celebrations collection, which we haven't covered in a while. Here we have a PSA 10 Metal Pikachu that sold for $908, while the PSA 10 Charizard sold for $1,900. And if you don't know, these cards don't come out of the UPCs very well most of the time. They're like chipped or scuffed. Yeah, not the best quality control with these cards in the UPCs, so they are a little bit more difficult to grade than you would think for a metal card. On to some vintage cards in today's recap. We have this first edition Dark Dragonite from Team Rocket in PSA 10, sold for $2,916. We saw two first edition Dark Charizards sell, one for $3,050, the other one for $3,250. Here is a first edition Giovanni's Persian from Gym Challenge, sold this week for $2,800. And as you probably already know, a lot of the colorless Pokemon cards from the WotC era are some of the most difficult ones to grade. For some reason, the holos are always just scuffed up, scratched, print lines, so this Giovanni's Persian is no exception. On to the E-Series, we have a couple cards from Aquapolis. Here's the Suicune Holo that sold for $1,100, and then we saw this Crystal Lugia sell as a PSA 10 for $9,500 this week. Here we have the Charizard Holo from EX Dragon, sold as a PSA 10 for $1,925. And then a few of the older EX cards. Here's a Gyarados EX from Fire Red Leaf Green that sold for $669. The Latios EX from Dragon sold for $920. The Umbreon EX from Unseen Forces sold for $8,300 this week. And then here we have a Leafeon Level X in PSA 9. That sold for $860. And if you recall, I think last week or the week before, we saw the Level X Glaceon sell for about half that amount as a PSA 9. So, yeah, not much love for Glaceon. And both of these cards as PSA 10 are just unbelievably expensive. So it kind of makes more sense to me, the $860 price in comparison to the PSA 10 price of this card. And then on to a couple of fairly disturbing auctions involving empty booster boxes. Here we have a Green Wing base set Charizard booster box that is not sealed, and I'm assuming do not have cards in it. At least there's no indication that there's cards in this box. Sold for $14,100. Here's a base 2 box that's not sealed that sold for $7,900. An unsealed fossil box sold for $11,507. The jungle box sold for $12,200. A legendary collection booster box sold for $14,900. And then here's an Aquapolis booster box that sold for $13,766. And I don't know if these were shilled. I mean, it seems very shady. Or if these buyers thought that they were sealed booster boxes. Who knows, folks? Let me know what you think. I hate seeing numbers like this for empty booster boxes. It's very odd and very shady, to say the least. On to the Fanatics Collect weekly auction block, we have a BGS 10 Black Label Japanese Glaceon that sold for $3,360. And then here is a 2012 Japanese Black and White promo Rayquaza Super Rare Card Set Get card in PSA 9 that sold for $3,720. We saw a few more expensive older EX cards. Here is the Blissey EX from Unseen Forces that sold as a PSA 10 for $1,590. We saw this Tyranitar from Unseen Forces that sold for $1,680. Here is an Espeon EX, also from Unseen Forces, that sold for $5,520. And then we saw another PSA 10 Umbreon EX that sold for $6,900. Here we have a couple of Gold Star sales. Here's the Gold Star Celebi in PSA 10 that sold for $3,120. The Gold Star Vaporeon sold for $3,120 as well. And then we saw this Gold Star Registeel from EX Legend Maker that sold for $3,240. And this Gold Star Groudon that sold for $5,160. And then we saw this Gold Star Metagross that sold for $6,600. Here we have from Gym Heroes, probably the most expensive card from that set, the first edition Blaine's Moltres in PSA 10 that sold for $3,840. And then here we have a Blaine's Charizard in first edition that sold for $4,320. Here is another Crystal Lugia in PSA 10 that sold for $10,500. And then the auction of the week, I'm going to have to give to this 2005 Japanese promo Spring Battle Road Victory Ring card that sold as a PSA 10 for $11,100. So the market, for the most part, is looking very healthy, aside from a couple of cards. We're looking pretty good, folks. Let me know what you think of this auction recap, and don't forget to go check out lowpopping.com. I would really appreciate it. That's all I got today, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in my next one.